Hello everyone and welcome to our Land at Lunch webinar. Thank you very much for coming to this session on how you get involved in local land use decisions. I'll just introduce ourselves at the moment. I'm Karen Grant and I am a good practice advisor with the Scottish Land Commission. My colleague Lisa Busby is our training coordinator, and my colleague David Stewart is policy lead in our policy team at the Commission. So Lisa and I are part of the good practice team, and David's part of the policy team. Before we start our session on getting involved in local land use decisions, I will hand you over to Lisa, who has a couple of housekeeping points for you.
Thanks, Karen, and hi everyone. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly run through some housekeeping, so thanks for everyone being patient while I do that. Today's webinar is recorded, that you might have seen on our holding slide, and I've also popped a message about that in the chat too. So all the information on how the recording is used and our full privacy policy is in the chat. As you can see, everyone's camera and mic are off today by default, but we welcome your questions in the Q&A box and the comments in the chat box. Questions and comments in the Q&A box can be anonymous if you prefer, but your screen name is always visible in the chat, and you can access those functions from the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Also on that toolbar, we have the option for you to turn on closed captions. So that's the CC button on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. Just to flag that the captions are auto-generated, so there may be a few inaccuracies, so apologies if that's the case. We'll be collecting feedback today, and the way we're going to do that is through some very short Zoom polls, and we're really grateful for your input into these. These polls are completely anonymous and we don't share the answers to the entire group. I'm going to pop a little bit more information on how we use that data into the chat as well, so watch out for that in a wee second. And lastly, I want to flag that we're going to be signposting quite a lot of resources today. I'm going to be doing my best to post links in the chat as we go along, but that might be quite fast-paced. But you can access any that are of particular relevance to you or interest to you right away, because hopefully I'll be getting them straight in the chat. But be aware that we collate all the tools and links for this session on a single resources page, and I'm going to share the link to that at the end of the webinar today. That's also the place where the recording of this session lives, as well as on our YouTube page. So bear with us, we'll get that to you at the end of the session, so you'll have it before you go away today. If you've got any questions at all on any aspect of this housekeeping, just put that question into the chat. And yeah, it's time for you to get involved now. So I'm just going to launch our first poll, and yeah, let someone give me a little heads up in the chat if that's working for you. 2 seconds and I'll get that launched. So hopefully you should be able to see that now. And if anyone can, drop me a wee message in the chat. But yeah, just go ahead and fill that in. That's 4 quick questions. They're really quick, they're really simple, I think, and I'll give you a few moments to do that. I'll be quiet now. Once again, thanks so much for doing that, everyone. It really helps us to shape future events and understand how well our current events are going. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Karen now, who's going to start the session for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa. So what's going to happen today is that I'm going to present a bit of an introduction to the topic of getting involved in local land decisions. David is going to then do an introduction to early engagement in the planning system, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers, because it's quite a broad topic and we realise that you might have specific things that you would like to know more about. So we'll hopefully be able to do that then. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so how can you get involved in local land decisions? Now, it's a large question, and there's a sort of complex and wide range of ways that people can engage with decisions that might affect them or their community. either whether you're an individual or a business or a land holding, or you're representing a land holding, or even representing the interests of an industry. There are lots of different layers of engagement. And unfortunately, there's no one-stop shop. There's unfortunately no hub where all that engagement comes together, where you can easily get all the information you need. A lot of these issues do need a little bit of legwork. So what we're hoping to do in this session is to help you navigate that and signpost you to ways you can get involved in different types of decision making relating to land, and in ways that you can find organisations or resources that can help you to increase that involvement. Again, do think about questions you have along the way, and then we'll have a session where those can be answered later in this workshop. Right, so I'm going to start at what is the sort of root of it from the Commission's perspective. In the Good Practice team of the Scottish Land Commission, we're very much trying to roll out the essence of the vision and the principles that are set out in the Scottish Government's Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. Now, this is like it's like a guide or a compass to the direction of travel that land reform hopes to achieve, and the benefits that it hopes to achieve for communities and for society as a whole, including addressing the big picture challenges that society faces. So the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement applies to everybody in the country, whether you're an individual who's wanting, who has an interest in any sort of interest in land, actually, whether it's from access or community projects or your own business, depends on land, or whether you're a landowner or land manager. And it applies to all types of owners and managers, whether they're public bodies or they're private individuals or private companies or community organisations. It's a statement that guides land use decision making to help good practice and good decisions, and to help increase transparency and fairness and opportunities for community. And of course, it aims to serve the need for community benefit, but also the wider public interest that we have on a national level, that the land satisfies the needs that our society has. So I don't have time here to go through all the principles of the Land Rights and the Responsibilities Statement, but I've just included the first principle, and it's very wordy and it's very broad, and that's why I wanted to include it, because the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement is really setting out what kind of relationship we want our society to have with land, so that the land is serving society in the best way it can, and that includes serving nature and tackling climate change. I must apologise for my voice. I've got a sore throat, so I'll be swigging water all the way through this presentation. Anyway, I hope it's understandable. So backing up the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, the Scottish Land Commission has produced a range of protocols, and you might think, well, what's a protocol? It's really going deeper into how you practically apply the principles of the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. And within the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, there are principles which say that there should be more opportunity for communities to be engaged with land use decision making, and that there should be more chance for communities to own and use land, own or use land. So there should be ways for land to serve community benefit. There's also a principle on transparency. So all landowners and land managers should communicate clearly and transparently about how they can be contacted, or how or any land use changes that they are planning, which could have significant or a moderate impact on any members of the community. So when you look at the Scottish Land Commission website, you'll see in the good practice section there's a suite of I think there's 8 or 10 protocols backing up all of the principles, and they're each is a list of expectations. So it helps you as communities or landowners or land managers to see what you can reasonably expect, how you can expect to be engaged, and how you can expect to have a say, and how, for land on the perspective of the landowners, what they should be letting people know about in relation to things that might impact them. We've also produced, so some of the protocols are pretty wordy, but you could find an easy route through the subject using our route map to community engagement, which includes kind of flowcharts that you can work through, asking questions like about the level of impact that any particular land use might have. So how do you find out about potential land use changes in your area? Now, this is different for different kinds of land use change. For some changes, there's an obligation to consult on them, and you should hear about them through the channels of communication within your area. And some changes, the way it's worded is that they should be consulted on, so that good practice would be that it's reasonable to expect that you're consulted about changes which have a direct, significant or moderate impact on you. And you might say, well, what's a significant impact or a moderate impact? Again, I would point you to our route map, where, while there's no hard and fast answer to that question, there's a guide about significant impact would be anything that's a permanent land use change, and moderate impact might be things that have a short-term disruptive impact on you. So that depending on what you're interested in having a say on, there's a number of different ways of engaging with it. You might find yourself in a situation of trying to be reactive to a proposed development, for example, through the planning system, or a consultation about an infrastructure project or something like that. And David is going to be speaking a little bit more about that later on. Or you might be worried about something like vacant or derelict land in your community, or neglected land or ownerless land that's not being made the most of in the community. Again, there's experience within the Commission that can help with those things. So if you have a burning question about any of those issues, do store them up for the question and answer section. Or you might be being proactive about seeing an opportunity that might benefit your community if only you could negotiate access to a piece of land. And we can help with all of those. Excuse me, I feel like I need to mute and cough for a second. Thank you. So you have, there's various levels of influence you can have on these different issues. You as an individual, you have it within your power. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's surprising how often it doesn't happen. Just speak to others, including landowners and managers or other people in your community. Many people can be really, it's good to sort of make the most of when people are approachable. You might be able to find that you can have a say in something that might impact you, even just by being brave enough to just ask them about it. At your local level, you might find that your local community organisations can help you to have a say. Your local authority might have consultations, or, for example, on their local plans. And also there might be other local mapping exercises. More and more there are these kinds of routes in which might come via the public sector or via community groups which are creating opportunities for you to have a say about land use decision making. You can also use your political representatives, starting with your council, or your community council and your council within your local authority, and your constituency MSPs and MPs are all people that it may be appropriate to engage in certain issues where you want to have your voice heard, or if there's issues that you feel are going to impact others in your community, and that's one route. On the regional level, there are initiatives, there are more and more initiatives. There is a sort of approach to increase integration in land use decision making through things like place plans, which I think David might mention in his presentation, and regional land use partnerships, which are currently going through a pilot process funded by the Scottish Government at the moment. And if you want to know more about that, do get in touch as well. And then on a national level, there are routes to contribute your views through consultations, and there are also citizens assemblies and citizens panels. So what if something goes wrong? Again, I would encourage people to communicate clearly, reasonably, and kindly to where they see something has not been consulted on correctly, or that or if you have worries about a particular land use. If you, I think you can get a long way by being approachable and friendly and communicating clearly, explaining the reasons for your concern. It might be useful to work with others in your community, or to think about the relevant representatives or bodies that might have an interest in that project, or might be involved in that project, including including even in public bodies that may be involved in the land use change. And the Scottish Land Commission can give you advice on good practice, or give advice to landowners and managers as well in specific cases. The kind of advice we can give is around what is good practice in each situation. So it can help with developing process that makes sure that communities' voices are heard and considered and responded to in these situations. Now I'm going to hand over to David, who will tell you about early engagement in the planning process.
Thanks very much, Karen. And yeah, following on from what Karen said, I'm going to be talking about the level of change in place that's significant. And so a land use planning system has grown up around that. It's about land use in the long-term public interest, and so there is a statutory need to consult and engage with communities. I'm going to mainly be talking about some research we published on the value of early engagement and planning, and the main findings from that. I'll also mention some case studies, and then talk about some opportunities to engage and some resources that can maybe support you to engage in the planning system. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, Karen. Thank you. So we commissioned this research, and there was really two reasons for that. The first was there'd been previous research from the Scottish Government that found there was a barrier to engagement in the planning system, and that was partly about a lack of trust in the system. And the second reason was we felt very strongly from our work on protocols and the land rights and responsibilities statement that actually early in-depth engagement is a good thing, but we wanted to persuade the development industry that that was the case. And so we commissioned this research, produced a range of case studies that are available from our website, And what we found was, while developers do have some concerns and a bit of trepidation, or at least they often do, feeling that, you know, development can be an emotive subject and people might start from a negative place, and we can maybe go back to that in the questions and answers. But actually, if you move beyond that and look at actual case studies of development, there are clear benefits. If you engage early, it builds trust. It almost always leads to better developments and the creation of better places. And from the developer's point of view, it might speed up the process and it's likely to help to deliver planning consent. And the picture here is of a regeneration in Glasgow and Anderston. There's a case study that the Land Commission carried out that showed that better place was created, particularly better green space, and that's through the long-term engagement with the existing community. Next slide, please. So recommendations from the research, well, firstly, we recommend that people should engage as early as possible and do it openly and in depth. It's also important, I think, to say that there needs to be clarity on parameters, you know, what's the extent of the possible development, but also what's up for discussion and what may have already been decided. And really, as a follow-up to that point, the research proposed actually in-depth engagement should act to underpin the plan for a local area, the local development plan. And that's really as a way of making sure people are consulted as early as possible and have a say on where housing and development takes place. And again, we can maybe touch on that in the discussion. This picture is from community consultation on a project called Fraser Avenue in Inverkeithing, and more information is available on that on the Architecture and Design Scotland website. Next slide, please, Karen. So really, I just wanted to conclude this short talk by looking at what next and also some resources. So a relatively new Planning Act, and as far as the local development plan for places goes, that's going to see a shift from local authorities maybe having a call for sites where developers and landowners might propose sites, and that would deliver a certain number of housing. And that's to move much more to local authorities developing master plans and place-based plans for an area. And I think that should lead to more in-depth community engagement. A second opportunity that Karen touched on is local place plans. That's something that's in the new Planning Act. The guidance hasn't been published yet, but that's a real chance, I think, to move from reacting to planning proposals to where communities are interested actually in developing a plan for their place. And the picture here is of Gairloch, which I think although it predates local place plans, it's a great example of how that could work, where the local community trust worked with the community's housing trust and developed a plan for housing, a museum, and facilities such as a cafe for their area. And really, just to close by mentioning a couple of resources that can be helpful. PAS, which used to be known as Planning Aid Scotland, can either provide individual advice on planning applications, or they can work proactively with communities to help develop plans for their places. And secondly, Architecture and Design Scotland, who I mentioned earlier, they provide a lot of resources that can help with placemaking and the development of plans. And I'll finish now and hand back for the question and answer session.
Thanks very much, David. So we've got now about 10 minutes yeah, just over 10 minutes for questions and answers, for any questions that you might have. And you can put them in through the question and answers box or the chat function. So yeah, what we're interested in are what issues are you do you want to engage with within your community? So please do bring forward questions that might help us signpost you to what the issues that you might actually want to be engaging with. There's a range of it could be that you're interested in affordable housing in your area, and there's communities that are initiating processes to create those opportunities. I'm just seeing a question coming up. Okay, right. So there's a question about saying that we've talked about the consultation process for land use change, but what happened when the actual landscape is changed? This attendee is based in Galloway and is feeling that there are changes to the landscape that are irreversible, and they're saying that farmers don't need planning permission for this. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there. If you want to add a bit of detail to that, that would be anyway, I'll come back to David. Would you like to answer a question on affordable housing and how communities can start to initiate opportunities around that specific issue, which is a concern that many are facing?
Yeah, certainly. I would really say, and I know affordable housing is a big issue for a lot of communities. I would advise using a couple of resources. One would be getting in touch with the Scottish Government's More Homes team, who provide a rural housing fund, but they actually provide funds to support affordable housing across Scotland, and definitely worth asking them for advice. And in fact, they can provide feasibility studies for funding for communities, but also getting in touch with what we'd call housing enabling bodies, such as the Communities Housing Trust or the South of Scotland Housing Trust, because they've got track records of supporting communities, so they can really speed up the process, understand what needs to be done to develop a viable proposal, and also help you assess housing in need for the area. And actually, we're going to be running a webinar with them in 2 or 3 weeks' time, so please look out for that. Thanks,
David. We've got a question coming up from Aisling about how can we ensure corporate landowners are transparent with their community about their contact details and plans for the land they've purchased, especially when the companies owning the land are investment funds, which are hard to trace back to individuals via Companies House. That's a good question, because and it's a question that's increasingly pressing as more land is bought by investors rather than let's say farmers or individuals that may be more embedded in their community. Now, how we would, I mean, those people are, as the Commission, we're sort of trying to address that in a number of ways. And one of the ways, like what we're doing later this month, actually, is we've invited a range of different landowners and land managers to a session on engagement and land rights and responsibilities, and including representatives of an investment company. And so we are trying to work directly with those people as well, to ensure that they fully understand their rights and their responsibilities to the communities that they may be purchasing land within. As we were saying, every organization or individual who is owning or managing land should be complying with the good practice set out in the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. I agree, it is hard to trace back to individuals, and we find it hard in our own casework as well. Sometimes we get communities raising issues about landowners who we find difficult to to make contact with too. And one of the routes that is being taken to try to improve that is that route towards creating a register of controlled interest in land, which means not just which means it's more of a register of how in a way how power is exercised over land. I'll just try to run through some of the so there's some useful links being put in the chat about with contacts that you will find from other participants. John Whitelaw is asking, what's the easiest way to find out about who owns land which has just been sold? David, do you want to take that, or will I?
Yeah, I can have a go at it. I mean, I think checking on the registers of Scotland, but of course there may be a bit of a time lag before it's actually registered, but I think that's the best resource, really.
Yeah, so actually, if it's just been sold, you're in a good position to be able to find out who owns it, because then there is an obligation to be on the Register of Scotland, the Land Register. So there's a question from Becky, who's interested in knowing where to start looking into opportunities to take on stewardship of a small ex-forestry area, Forestry and Land Scotland owned, Forest and Land Scotland owned, that's now designated for natural regeneration. I mean, that's an interesting question, and one that is coming up in our casework as well, where communities who would like to see the land around them that has designations on it managed in a way to ensure that nature value is enhanced and protected. In terms of, I'm not quite clear from Becky's message whether it's still in public ownership or not. And if it is in public ownership, there are routes through that for communities and precedents set with Forest and Land Scotland for different types of community engagements and involvement with land, ranging from ownership through to communities having a lease on a piece of land for whatever use that is they're interested in. If it's no longer owned by, if it's no longer publicly owned, that's slightly different, probably a bit trickier well, the route is not so clear.
Karen, I think there was a question asking for clarity on the difference between local development plans and local place plans. So if I could just briefly answer that. The local development plan's a statutory plan that councils have to prepare for land use in their local area, and they'll do that every 10 years, and there's a need to consult. But in a way, that's really the big plan in terms of major land use change planned for your area, whereas a local place plan's a voluntary thing that communities or communities of interest can decide that they might think there's an issue or a couple of issues in their area. So an example in Gairloch, it was depopulation and a need for affordable housing and some amenities. So it's a different thing. It's people choosing to be proactive and develop a plan and then take that to the local authority as a proposal.
Thanks, David. I'm also coming back to Lizzie's question about she's wondering if anyone within the webinar has been directly involved in any of the pilot RLAPs, and if you could maybe post in the chat if you have, and then maybe you and Lizzie can find your way to each other. In the last minute or so, there was questions about transparency around publicly owned forest land from Alistair. Yes, of course, a public body should also be complying with the transparency requirements set out within the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement, and we're trying to work closely with public sector landowners as well to improve their practice in that. But if you have specific a specific question, do get in touch with us. Yeah, there's also finally, I better not keep talking because we're coming to the end of it, but the attendee who was asking about farming and the impact of farming was raising the issue that a farmer can rip out hedges to make fields more kind of monoculture without applying for planning permission, and that's an issue that would fall within our good practice, our good stewardship protocol. So I'd suggest having a look at that, and that the trend in that issue is towards more multiple benefits from land use. So yeah, I see your point there. Now I need to hand back to Lisa, who is going to facilitate the next poll.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. Yes, thanks so much, everyone, for taking part in such an active discussion and putting your questions in the chat and your questions into the Q&A box. We've obviously not quite got time for all of them. So what I would say is, please do contact us. A lot of these questions are quite specific, and it might be something that we can support with, or through our casework channel. So in a moment, I'm going to pop the contact details for the Good Practice team at the Land Commission into the chat. You might have also noticed that I've popped a resource page for finding out about the owner of land, which is a question that is obviously intrinsically connected to today's topic. And it's also one we've covered in a previous webinar, and we've got an existing resource page about that. So have a wee look. That said, lots of the questions that are coming up today are also connected to future webinar topics. We've got webinars coming up on housing. We've got webinars coming up on vacant and derelict land. So do tune into those, do sign up for those. I'm also going to drop into the chat in just a moment the resource page for today, which has a lot of the links in it that I have already posted, but it's also got further links. So if you had a question about an area, there was questions coming up about landscape specifically, look on our resources page. It has more in it than what was just discussed today. So have a wee look at that. And as I say, if your question is not answered and you're still not sure how to take the next step, if you've got a practical situation that you're dealing with at the moment, do just get in touch with us as part of the Good Practice team. I'm going to go on mute just now. I'm going to pop up the second poll and give everyone a little chance to do that. As I say, we're very grateful for that. And I'll just flag, as I forgot to do earlier, there are multiple questions, so do scroll through. I'm going to launch that now. Okay, I'm going to end that poll now, and I'm going to hand over to Karen to introduce our next session that's happening in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you all very much for coming to this session. I'm sorry about my voice. I'm sorry, it was a bit of it kind of by necessity had to be a really speedy zip through what is actually a really massive issue. So do, if you have specific questions that were not covered or not covered adequately, do have a look at those resources, and also if there's something that you feel we could answer by email, do get in touch, or if you have a specific local issue you would like advice on, also please do get in touch at the Good Practice email address. So our next session is on Wednesday, the 1st of February. As Lisa was saying, this is part of our long series of public events. And it is about what is common good land and how is it managed, which is a huge issue and one affecting, well, really every community in Scotland. So do sign up for that one. It should be a juicy topic. So all that's left for me to do is to thank you again for taking part and see you next time.